Recently put together an image that looked like an acrylic pour swirl in MetaBrush and iColorama, and so decided to make this video to show how I did this. I start in MetaBrush with a image and create a blank layer and then hide the source layer. Then I go to wet brushes and start painting on this blank layer and just sort of fill in. I'm using a wet brush because it's not as detailed as a regular brush, and I don't want the basis for my swirl to be very detailed. So I pull in as much as I can, and then I decide to change from my Pat 1 to my reveal brush to sort of smear it around. And then I'll be ready to go to my swirl under Tools, Swirl, and start working my way around. You can see how it swirls it up, and you can change the size of the brush. Changing the opacity doesn't do much. If you look up at the top center, you'll see that there's some black there, and that's because we're working on a transparent layer, and when I get near the edge where it doesn't mix transparent in, it mixes black in. We're not going to be using the edges anyway, so it's really not that big a deal. So I continue to move it around here and make some swirls. If I don't want the black around the edge, then what I can do is create a different type of, another layer underneath it. So I go to my layer palette, I create another blank layer, and then I have to fill that with a color. I want to fill it with a nice bright yellow. But it took me a little while here to figure out how to get that color to show up. So I had to go to regular brushes. I couldn't go to wet brushes. I had to go to regular paint brushes. Oh, now my color button shows up. I can choose my color, a nice bright yellow. I go back to my layers palette and I fill in that layer with the yellow. Then I tap on the top layer and merge it down into that yellow layer. Now when I use my swirl, it will mix the yellow from the outside around this image. And the very first tap gave me a big yellow square, so I got rid of that and then went back in and started mixing it in all around with my swirl brush. And when I'm happy with it, then I can save it off. But let's go back to the original one. And I've saved that off. I save it as a PNG with a transparent background. And then I'm ready to go over to iColorama and use that. So I go to iColorama and I bring up, and really I don't want image from library, so I cancel right out of that. And I want a blank canvas. I'll take a 5x4 canvas. I'm going to use Effects Blend to bring in that MetaBrush image. And then I can move it around. I can rotate it. When I get something that I like, then I apply that. To make it even more interesting, then I bring in the same image again, take a different portion of it, and blend it over top. So I'm in Effect Blends, and now I can use a different blend mode. Look at Multiply, Overlay. Overlay looks pretty nice, and I use Overlay sometimes. But let's move on to some others. Let's try Lighten and Darken. I probably prefer Lighten here, but let's look further. We've got some ones that are pretty intense, like Difference, Negation, and Exclusion, that I like a lot, but I didn't really want something that intense this time around. So let's look at Pin Light. Well, Pin Light, I really like what it's doing here. So check the opacity. Yeah, I want it at full opacity. I'm going to apply that. Now I can move on to my tuning. And the first thing I like to do is improve the local contrast. And I do that with Adjust Tone Lab 4. But at full, it is too intense, and it also changes the colors too much. So I usually like to keep that at around 10 to 20%. The next thing you might notice is that there are some like dots that show up in this swirl. I call them sharpening dots because it's almost like it's trying to over sharpen those areas. And to get rid of those, I use style coherence. And here's style coherence number 1 at full opacity, and I really like how smooth it smoothed everything out. Then I like to add a little bit of raise, like the paint is raised, like you've actually poured paint onto a canvas and it's raised up. So I'll use raise 1, and usually at 40 to 50% is what is pleasing to me. And there's my image. And you can see here a close-up of that. I also did another work with the yellow version. I added a little bird in there and his little tweet. And so you see that there are lots of things that you can do with this kind of random swirling of images. Until next time, enjoy.